Happy Wednesday and welcome back to All Things Considered. I'm your host, Al Scott. With me today, I've got a very special guest, former Fresno State Bulldog and beat writer for The Athletic, Jesus Cano. Jesus, welcome to the show today.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me, man. This is cool.
Jesus, so you recently started working with The Athletic, covering the Atlanta Braves. Just a couple sentences about how that's going for you so far.
Oh, fantastic. It's the dream job. I'm 26 now, but I started writing about sports when I was 15, covering high school sports like that. From the moment I knew I wanted to be a beat reporter, specifically a baseball beat reporter. So the fact that it kind of all came into fruition the past couple of months, and covering a good team like the Braves, it helps that they're the best team in baseball right now. But I think what's made it really fun is that it's a fan base that a lot of people really care about throughout the South, and I think that's really special to see that a lot of people interact with the work, are sending me story ideas and are clearly watching and are clearly reading. I think that's what makes it really fun to do so I'm just thankful, man. Like every day I wake up, I'm just thankful for the opportunity to be here.
Your road to Atlanta has not exactly been a linear one. You started out, in Pittsburgh, not Pennsylvania, but Pittsburgh, California.
The real Pittsburgh.
The real Pittsburgh.
Real Pittsburgh doesn't have an H.
The real Pittsburgh doesn't have an H. And so after that, then you found yourself in Fresno, and then you found yourself working for MLB.com, Baseball America, now The Athletic. Can you just talk a little bit how that journey started? But, first going back to high school, covering high school football games.
Yeah, so as a kid, I've always enjoyed writing. It's just been always something that I really liked. I think it was a good form to communicate through the English language to begin with, because my parents didn't speak English when I was a kid, so I was kind of the middleman for a lot of translations, whether we went out to a restaurant, went to the bank, or had to translate documents and stuff like that about them too. So it's stuff like that. And I think I always wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an English teacher, or an ELD teacher to help people communicate. But I've always had a huge passion for sports. And as I was growing up, as a early teenager, preteen, that's kind of when Twitter and stuff started taking off. So it was easier to kind of get your news for different types of sports and stuff like that. And this is where you'd be able to see reporters, who I remember Buster Olney was a guy I used to read a lot when I was a kid. And as that happened, I would read these great sports stories and I'd be like, this is something that I'd probably want to do down the road. And the opportunity came during my freshman year of high school. We had a really good football team, and high school sports in the area of the Bay Area where I was from was really big. And so I saw there was people writing about it, and I was like, you know what, let me take a shot at it. And that's kind of how it all started. I started off covering my own school, Pittsburgh High School in the East Bay. And then all of a sudden I was covering the league, the Bay Valley Athletic League. And I was covering them in football. I mean, they had some dogs in football. I mean, I was covering Najee Harris. I was covering Ronnie Rivers. Jake Hainer was at Monte Vista, just a couple of Fresno State guys to name. That was a really good league. They ended up having Liberty, ended up having Jake Butterfield, who went on to play quarterback first with Oregon and then San Jose State, and Sione Baki, who I think ended up getting drafted by the Lions. They had a lot of really good players that I was able to see and cover throughout different sports. And kind of did that, I freelanced, I worked a full-time job, and then when I graduated, I went to community college at Los Banos College in Pittsburgh, where I'm from. And I was the sports editor there, but I was still covering high school sports. I was working maybe 60 hours a week, but the chase was great. It was so fun to do that, to come in, it gave me a lot of purpose. And I knew the chase was, I think, the most fun part of it, really. And then, pandemic happens. It's when I transferred to Fresno State. We don't do anything the first year. And then that second year, I become the managing editor. And that's when, the football team's doing really good with Kalen DeBoer. They beat UCLA. I remember being at that game, which is probably one of my favorite games to cover of all time. Kalen DeBoer leaves and all this other stuff happens. So it was a really eventful first year at Fresno State. And actually, while I was at Fresno State, I worked at the San Jose Mercury News my last semester of college, where I was still the managing editor, but I was working as a sports clerk, which is basically a position that doesn't exist anymore. It was a lot of clerical stuff. I would be in charge of jotting down the hole-in-ones that were reported throughout the entire Bay Area that we recorded to put it in the newspaper. TV listings, back in the day they used to put TV listings in the newspaper, so people still wanted that, so that's what I was doing. and occasionally, helped out with high school sports. And then during the summer, when there was no high school sports, I got to cover the A's and some pro soccer that came in. I think I covered Mexico. I covered the 49ers for a bit too. So I did that. And yeah, I got the fellowship at MLB.com, was out there in 2023, which is the year the D-backs went to the World Series. I would not have expected to be covering a World Series, a year out of college, really. But that's kind of what happened. I did, filled in for a lot of different beat reporters that didn't want to make the trip to Arizona because it was so hot. So I got to cover. I remember the Dodgers, the Padres. I covered the Reds. I covered the White Sox. I covered the Red Sox. Like almost, I would think I covered like half of the league that year, which was fun to do and really helped me out down the road. And then, went over to Baseball America where I thought I was going to be there a little longer. Worked on the scouting side of things, not, as a reporter, but also like got more into player development and really look into the numbers and crunching stuff and, evaluating players based on what I've seen and talking to scouts. I was still in Arizona, covering the backfields. So I was there. I mean, I was there February through November, and that includes that stretch of summer where it gets to 115, 160. We was out there. We was out there. We was posted out there. So that was really fun, man. And then the opportunity with the Athletic kind of happened, and now I write for the Athletic. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm covering the best team in baseball. Like it's kind of crazy how all these things come together. But at the end of the day, for me, it's like the journey that really makes me appreciate just being in this position.
You talk about the journey, and part of that required you to, do things a little bit differently than, the average reporter. And one of those things is being able to use your, being bilingual as an asset. I know that you've previously mentioned to me that that was one thing that really helped you stand out when you first started at MLB.com, and has helped you, specifically with a lot of, Latin athletes. I know you've mentioned it talking with Ronald Acuna Jr., how being able to interview him in Spanish makes him maybe a little bit more comfortable. Can you talk about why that is an asset, and why, for other reporters coming up that speak Spanish, why it's so important to use that?
I think it really, varies by sport. Like I really never used my Spanish. Like I, grew up in a Spanish speaking household. I spoke in my entire life, but when it came to work, like throughout high schools and, I can really only name it two times where I was able to use it. Once when I was covering a high school soccer game and the guy that scored 4 goals didn't know how to speak English. And then the second one was when I actually wrote a story about Abraham Montaño, who was the kicker at Fresno State at the time. Shout out Abe, really good dude. Hope he's well. I interviewed his dad in Spanish, and like his dad got emotional talking. He only spoke English, and it was nice hearing the emotion. It was raw, it was natural, it wasn't forced or anything like that. And I feel like there really isn't a sport out of the big sports in the Americas. And I'm not counting soccer in this case because obviously the MLS isn't on the same level as everything else, right? But to be able to use Spanish, I think, has been a huge asset because a lot of these players, I mean, it's their native tongue, right? Like it's the first thing that they learn how to speak. It's what they've spoken their entire life, and it's kind of, some of them don't know how to speak English, like regardless of like how long they've been in the league. Some of them don't know how to speak English. When you get, a lot of the translators that I've encountered have done a great job, but when you're able to talk to a guy naturally and be able to one understand what you're asking them, understand what they're saying, and then also being able to use a natural translation, using the words that you have, because there's been instances where I've heard, a player, say something, and the what's it called, the translator translates it, and it's like, okay, I mean the interpreter translates it, and I'm like, okay, that's not exactly accurate, but I have to use it because it's the official, what other reporters are using and stuff like that. When I have the opportunity to interview them on their own, like it's good. And I think what I've learned, specifically when I was at Baseball America covering the complex, so you get a lot of these 18, 19-year-old dudes who are just coming to the United States for the first time. And for them, it's a big culture shock on so many levels because it's not just the playing professional baseball side. It's like a lot of these guys grew up in the DR, don't, walking into a Walmart for the first time is them like walking into Disneyland because there's just so much else stuff going on, some stuff that they've never seen. These guys don't know how to order an Uber. They don't know how to use their dishwasher. They don't know how to do a lot of simple things, right? And I think the MLB has done a really good job implementing a lot of programs within teams that have been able to help them with that transition, whether it's like doing stuff like going to an airport, taking them shopping and stuff like that. And I think that really painted a picture to me as to how valuable it is to be able to speak these guys in Spanish, especially the young guys. Like I was able to like, develop really good rapport with a lot of really good athletes that came out. I point to guys like Roldy Brito, who, came in as an unknown guy, wasn't even a Baseball America ranked top 30 guy, and now is going to be on the top 100 soon. And me and him have a good relationship. Luis De La Torre, Argenis Kayama with the Giants. There's plenty of different players that I've been able to really talk to and get to know a little bit better. And as a result, just be able to tell a lot of better stories. If the translator's there, I don't think the level of authenticity comes out the same. So I think if there are any Spanish speaking reporters, or like even reporters who specifically want to work in baseball and you don't speak Spanish, I think the more that you can learn, the better, because guys, even if they know that you aren't, fully fluent, if they see that you're trying, if they see that you're putting in the effort to communicate them in their native language, they're going to really appreciate that. And it just becomes a little bit more sense of comfort for them.
Well, thank you for sharing. Now, let's talk about these Braves. They're best record in baseball right now, up and down this roster. The last couple years have sort of were a little bit down in terms of what the Braves were at, but now they're back to that level of pretty much everyone in their offense is an above average hitter. Obviously, Austin Riley has sort of scuffled, but outside of that, every single player in that outfield, every single player in that infield, then you got Drake Baldwin, who's been one of, if not the best catchers in baseball. Um, Up and down that roster, they're just hitting again and again. The pitching, what exactly has caused this Braves team to turn around? Was it simply just bad luck the last couple of years and it's finally, unfolding? Was it the new manager change? You've seen that locker room. What has caused this revival in this Atlanta Braves team?
Well, I think from what I've seen in the time that I've been with the team for the past month, it really comes down to dudes who, were labeled as role players that have continually stepped up. I think that's been kind of the story of the Atlanta Braves this season, because heading into the season, I mean, they had a plethora of different injuries that they were dealing with, right? Specifically when it came to the starting rotation. Hurston Waldrop was hurt, Spencer Schwellenbach was hurt, Spencer Strider ended up going out with an injury. So right now, like at the beginning, immediately right away, before you even take the first pitch for opening day, you're down significantly with the starting rotation. And there's guys who stepped up to the plate, stepped up to the rubber, I guess, in this case, if we're talking about pitchers, right? I think Grant Holmes has done what he's could in that position. Martin Perez just continues to find ways to still continue to be a contributor on a lot of major league teams, and they have both of those guys in the back end of the rotation. Chris Sale has, done what Chris Sale is advertised to do. Bryce Elder has really stepped up and kind of taken hone in as that number two starter right now within the rotation. And Spencer Strider's back is still kind of trying to really hone in on the command, which is an issue that he's had. But the rotation is looking good. And then you look at the lineup. The lineup has had, you look at a superstar like Ronald Acuna Jr. I mean, he was slow at the beginning of the season, and there was other guys holding down the fort like Matt Olson, who I mean is the Iron Man of the entire MLB at this point. Drake Baldwin didn't suffer a sophomore slump and continued to hit well. Michael Harris recently has really stepped up, but it's also dudes, like Mauricio Dubon, who, when Ha-Sung Kim's hurt and he's supposed to, take over a bulk of the reps at shortstop, does really well, and then Jorge Mateo starts to do really good, so it gives the opportunity to flex Dubon into different spots. Dominic Smith, I think, wrote a story about how the importance of his clubhouse presence is huge, but it's also the bat. I mean, he is a really productive hitter. I think it's at to the point where there's discussions about whether or not should they ignore the splits and just continue to put him in a position where he can hit against any batters because he's been that good. Mike Yastrzemski, I think, arguably had a case to potentially be a candidate for a player of the month for the Braves this past year, and the way he was able to step up, specifically against right-handers and, kind of figure things out, So they just had a plethora of guys that really stood up so far. I think that's what it is. And Acuna's starting to get hot. Olson's, consistent. Mike Harris is hitting the ball like it owes him money. And there's different players that just continue to contribute. I think we haven't seen the healthiest version of the Atlanta Braves, and I think when we do, and I think that includes having Drake Baldwin back, who was essential in essentially being, the leadoff hitter and did such a great job while Acuna was absent. They get him back and they plug him. You got Acuna, Baldwin, Olson, Mike Harris. I mean, that's a dangerous four right away, and there's different situations throughout the lineup where you can bring guys in to pinch hit. If you have Yaz on the bench, and there's a righty lefty matchup, you bring them up, So I think they're in a really good spot right now. And like I've said in the past, like once this team gets healthy, it's going to be really interesting to see how much they play for the rest of the season.
We met at Fresno State, and there is a former Fresno State Bulldog on that Braves team, Dinuba native and former Bulldog Dylan Lee, who's having one of, if not the best seasons of his career. He's been pretty much a top 10 reliever since he's came into this league. I think he's eighth in ERA in baseball among relievers since 2022. Can you just talk about Dylan Lee and maybe some of the success that he's had, sort of being that key, guy, late in that bullpen? Not necessarily a closer. They've got plenty of guys like Suarez and Iglesias to lock down the eighth and ninth innings, but he's been just as valuable, if not more valuable, than both of them.
Yeah, I think he's the first guy you bring out the pen if you want to win the game. I think that's exactly what's turned out for him. I think it's funny, like me and Dylan Lee obviously have that connection with Fresno State, so we're always talking about that. But I remember when I was at Fresno State and he was pitching in the World Series in my writing class with Professor Donald Monroe. Shout out to Monroe too. One of the stories that we wrote about was Dylan Lee playing in the World Series, and I remember us having to write like leads and stuff like that surrounding about him and stuff. And I remember, I forget her name. I mean, I never saw her after this. I had a classmate who wrote an amazing lead where it said something to the lines of, in a Central Valley where XXX are growing a new form of baseball, a champion was born in Dylan Lee, and I told him that story recently. He got a kick out of that. But just going on to just specifically what he's done, I think he's been able to dominate the splits pretty well. I think that's what it is, especially when you're a lefty. You're obviously bringing in for that righty matchup, but I think he's just really just been able to gain confidence in himself over the years. Going from a guy who was released during minor league free agency, didn't play for about a year and a half because of the pandemic, and at some point, quite frankly, told me that he was contemplating retiring because there just was no traction or no motion in his career. And now all of a sudden, he's arguably, I mean, him, Suarez, and Iglesias, I mean, are one of the three best relievers in baseball, and all have potential to be an all-star, and this Lee's also a guy that really had to grind it out, a post 10th round pick, signed for, I don't know, maybe $10,000, I think is what he told me. Didn't sign for a lot of money. They used him to save money and, just clawed every single step of the way. I knew about where there isn't necessarily the best product in terms of athletic growth. No disrespect to, I believe, Marcus McMarion. I may be wrong. I may be right. Did he go to Dinuba?
I'm not sure. I know that he's from the Valley.
Okay, but
Uh,
that may be right. That may be wrong. But like, like he really had to grind it and claw his way out to be able to do it. And I think you're seeing much better from the command, but also he's not walking guys. Like I don't even, he's not walking guys. I think it's the biggest thing. He comes in and gets guys out, whatever situation it is, lefty righty, lefty lefty matchup. Like I think he's just done such a better job really rediscovering his secondaries and finding a good command of the zone.
there's a chance that two Bulldogs are end up being at the All-Star game, and if you told me that one of them was Dylan Lee, I would have been surprised. Not because Dylan Lee hasn't been good this year, just because it's really hard for relievers to make the All-Star game. The Padres had three last year, and that was the first time that I think that had ever happened. And yet, the Braves got a case for three guys this year. Obviously, there's another month plus to go, but it's possible. Obviously, you got Judge and Taylor Ward off his strong starts as well. Ward's been not necessarily hot with the bat, but he's still getting on base.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of former Dogs in Major League Baseball, both on the playing field and in the writing. Now riding in the league. So yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, crazy yet crazy to think.
Moving from California to, I mean, obviously you spent some time in Arizona, but now you're going across the country to Atlanta. What are some of the things that you've enjoyed about the Peach State so far in your time there?
So I actually got to come here last year with Baseball America for the Futures game because I mean, game was being played here at Truist Park, and I mean, quite frankly, like I've been in Atlanta for maybe a month now, I believe. But I really haven't gone to do much just because I was on the road half of that time. Like, I've gone on 3 different cities with the team. So I'm gone for half of that, and it's the time that I do get here, like when I'm back on off days and stuff like that, like I'm just so tired and my social batteries drain. I just stay at home. Like yesterday, it was nice to just stay at home, hang out with my cat Zoe, and do all that stuff. But to an extent, like I was able to visit the aquarium, which is just amazing. Like I would never expected that one of the best aquariums in the world to be located in Atlanta, Georgia, where there's like really no big river, big source of water and stuff like that compared to other cities. So that's been good so far. I mean, I live down the street from the stadium, so not no location or anything, not to dox myself or anything, but like I'm down the street from the stadium, so I spent a decent amount of time like at the Battery, like post game, pre game. Like there's been times like where if we're off and stuff like that, I'll get some work done there, or just go out there to get some food, or just hang out with uh, other media members who are in town. Like it's a good time, but I would like to spend a little bit more time down in Atlanta. Like I know Midtown and the Beltline is really, really nice from what I've been told. I'm trying to get down there, but it's like I said, like earlier to you, like it's just so tough to get down there just because of the traffic. The traffic sucks. I think that's one thing that I really enjoyed about Arizona is that I had, where I was at. I was 3 minutes away from the airport, 10 minutes away from Tempe, downtown Phoenix, and Old Town Scottsdale. Like I had all those things like within like 10 to 15 minutes away from me. So going from that to going all the way in there, having to pay for parking and all that stuff and everything else that comes with it, but I want to find the time to do it. Hopefully I can do that during the All-Star break and just find some time to just kind of wind down, relax, and spend time, here. But I do have some cousins who live in Gwinnett County, who have, they took me to Stone Mountain, Georgia, during the holiday this past week. And that was cool, but definitely want to get, into the city and stuff like that, especially before it becomes a little bit too humid for my liking down here.
Yeah, a lot to do there. I've been to Atlanta twice. Once in 2022, I saw a game. The Braves were playing the Marlins, and then I went in 2020, like right before COVID. I had a friend, CJ Albertson, who was running in the U.S. Marathon trials that year. And so I went to go support him. And while I was there, I went to go watch my favorite basketball team, the Atlanta Hawks, play. They played Damian Lillard and the Blazers. And then I also got a tour of the Brave Stadium, Truist Park, which it was only a couple years old at the time. But that stadium is beautiful. And the Battery, I remember going bowling there. There's a lot to do. And I think that like when you see like stadium rankings come out, a lot of them overlook Truist Park, and I'm not saying that it's in the upper echelon, there with PNC and Petco and Oracle Park or the greats like Fenway and Wrigley, but if you get down, into that next tier in that 5 to 10 range, I don't see any reason why Truist Park isn't there. And I think a lot of it is the atmosphere that comes with the Braves
Yes.
faithful. For me, when I'm thinking of like a top ballpark, a lot of it comes down to atmosphere. And the Braves, they nail that. When a new reliever comes in and the whole stadium, the lights turn off and you've got the chop going on and, you've got the music blaring, you know, th- there are not many ballparks that have a better atmosphere right now than Truist Park. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the sheer atmosphere that comes with the fans.
I think it's also the history of the team. I think TBS did such a good job, with Ted Turner, RIP, owned the team and putting it on a national stage that they, it's not just like that at home. Like it's like that everywhere. Like it was like that in Miami. Like there was more Braves fans than there was Marlins fans in that stadium throughout that entire homestand. Like to be transparent, that's not just because I covered the team. Like that was the fact. Like there was maybe like an average of 7 to 8 thousand people each night. I would say like half of those fans were Braves fans. So if they played a team that didn't have a strong following, like per se the A's, like I think that attendance would have dropped down drastically, right? But like Boston, they had such a big presence. That's an interleague team, and there was a lot of Braves fans there. This past weekend in Cincinnati, which by the way, great city. A lot of people like to hate on Cincinnati. I had a lot of fun in Cincinnati. It was a great city, but to extent like when Ronald Acuna hit that leadoff home run on Sunday, the crack of the bat like maybe lasted for like a second because the rest of the fans just started going crazy and it felt like we were at Truist Park for a second. So I mean they do a good job traveling well, and like I've liked the atmosphere so far. Like I think compared to the ballparks that I grew up going, obviously I went to, I grew up an A's fan, so the Coliseum's a little bit different. Oracle Park's a little bit different. And I think the fact too that we're seeing a trend where like at least when we were growing up, there was still a lot of teams that had multi-use fields, and big parking lots around it, right? Like I think now we're seeing, not just for baseball specifically, but we're seeing a lot of sports venues start to construct, like entertainment districts around it, which is the case. Like it's funny, like coincidentally, like I'm a big geography guy, so I was looking at, I like to go to Google Street View and check a lot of like what the old, like what my neighborhood looked like in 2008. And I, went over to Truist Park and it was just a big patch of grass. Like that's all it was. It was like just big wooded area. And you go turn that to nothing to an entertainment district that employs people, that brings in a lot of taxes to the city, that hosts a major league professional team that, brings in a lot of money. And I know a lot of people obviously are sometimes against using public money to fund stadiums. But I think if you're able to do it the right way and invest it into the point where a lot of money comes back to the community and it's going to be there for years to come because there's a whole destination around it. Like I think it's such a good investment, and I think it's a really good job where if owners who don't want to fork up the money to pay for their own stadium like they can and want to use public money to be able to fund it, like I think that's such a great way to kind of convince people because it creates an atmosphere around it. Like when I was down at Cincinnati, like we didn't have like a Battery to be specific, but they had like a whole neighborhood of like bars and stuff like that had really good nightlife that they told me was packed even on non-game days because it was right on the river. And I was told that before they built the ballpark, it was just a big hole. So it comes from a big hole to something there. So I mean, I like the stadium a lot. Like I remember coming in the first day and being wowed. Maybe from like a architectural standpoint, it's maybe I wouldn't say basic, but it doesn't stick out compared to other times. But like you're in a good location. There's a lot of stuff to do after, pre and post game. It's also further away from downtown Atlanta, which I can understand people's concern about that. But at the same time, would you rather be able to come up here for a game than to be bottlenecked in a bunch of, horrible downtown Atlanta traffic, that also has the State Farm arena and the Mercedes-Benz Bowl. And then also in addition to that, it's like, you have Georgia Tech on campus. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think this gives it a good space to like separate himself, but still be Braves country.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, it's not that far away. It's 20-30 minute drive
Yeah.
at
Yeah. It's a 20,
most.
30 minute drive.
You're close enough that, the metro area is obviously able to get there, but not so bogged down by the traffic. I love a downtown stadium. So the Padres, who I watch religiously, they were in Qualcomm Stadium in Mission Valley, and that was one of those multi-use stadiums. They used it for the Chargers, for the Aztecs, and the Padres, and it was a little bit more out of the way, but you didn't really get to capture that San Diego magic. The Padres in the early 2000s, they moved down to downtown San Diego, and it changes the landscape of downtown San Diego. If you look at the landscape in 2000 versus now in San Diego, it looks 9 day different. The amount of nightlife going on, the amount of food and restaurants and bars. The Padres are consistently ranked at number one or in the top three among stadium rankings. And a lot of it has nothing to do with the actual field itself. A lot of it is the atmosphere and the food that's going on around the ballpark. And that's another reason why I love, Atlanta, is you got the Battery, you got the stuff going on outside the ballpark, right outside the stadium. And I think, when I think of stadiums that I like versus stadiums I don't like, a lot of it comes down to what's going on around the stadium. What's the skyline like? What's the environment going around the stadium? I'm not a fan of walking into a big parking lot right outside the stadium. No shade to the Dodgers or the Angels or, even the A's former Coliseum, but it's bland. There's nothing interesting about that. And, does that require, some public transportation to help? Sure. But a ballpark planned properly can do wonders not only for the team but for the community as a whole.
And you see it everywhere too, like different cities and stuff. Like I think about like the Sacramento Kings because I grew up a fan of them, unfortunately. Like them being like located in the North Highlands area of Sacramento, where Sleep Train Arena was like essentially in a suburban neighborhood, which is crazy. Like it's like imagine having like for the Fresno viewers, like having a arena built on in Clovis, like out of nowhere. Like that's basically what it was. It was like suburban real estate, boom, arena out of nowhere, right? And then obviously to convince them to not move to Seattle, they opened that downtown commons, and it's I've seen it revive so much life into Sacramento, and the nightlife that surrounds itself, from Old Town to like some of the bars that they have right there in the businesses. Like even for it being Sacramento, a team that a city that quite frankly maybe shouldn't, you wouldn't think to house like a major four sports, and now it's crazy because they're housing two, even if one's temporarily, but they're making also the expansion bid. Which you look at that expansion bid too, it's not just a new stadium, it's a whole entertainment district that comes with it. I think that's really what it is. Like, and you also see with a lot of like not MLS teams, but a lot of USL teams, like Indy 11, used to play at Lucas Oil Stadium, and now they're building their own stadium with an entertainment district, and they're not even an MLS level team, but they know the amount of revenue that it can could come just having a game. People, even if you're not a soccer fan, why wouldn't you want to go to a soccer game, get drunk, and then get drunk after? Like that's just kind of how the way the American mind kind of works now. So it's really good. And I think, you mentioned Petco Park. Like, I think the best experience this so far has been visiting all these new ballparks, man. Like, I've been to Petco as a fan. I remember watching the A's beat the Padres there. Matt Chapman had a 3-run home run. I remember that. Um, and I mean, that's a stadium I'm looking forward to going back to. Just a city. Like, I actually get to be there for close to 5 days because I fly in on a Sunday and I leave on a Thursday before I head back to San Francisco in the Bay Area where I'm originally from, man. But I'm looking forward to San Diego, man. Not just, I mean, the stadium's beautiful. The stadium is beautiful itself, but the city itself, I think that is I mean, probably one of the most underrated cities in all of America. I think in California it's properly rated, but I think throughout the rest of the United States, people don't know how great of a city San Diego is.
There's something to be said about it being 70 degrees and sunny all year long.
It's not that
There's not
cold during
many
the day.
that could say that.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great. Even right now, like that would be like the ideal like location to cover a team. Like I from baseball reporters I've heard, that's one of the most coveted jobs, when it opens up because everybody wants to live in San Diego. Arizona, surprisingly, one of them, but that's also because you get to sleep in your own bed during spring training. But San Diego is definitely a popular destination among baseball writers, media, and players itself too.
Last question, then we'll get to some Fresno State stuff. The whole salary cap versus no salary cap. Obviously a big hot topic with the collective bargaining agreement coming up this upcoming off season. I know that you've spent some time talking to players. Maybe what is the overall consensus about? Is there even going to be a baseball season next year?
Yeah, I've asked guys. A lot of them don't think there's going to be a baseball. Not there's going to be a lockout next year. I don't want to go ahead and say that there's not going to be a baseball season, but I think there's definitely going to be a lockout. I think that's just kind of the sentiment throughout the entire league, whether it's when with coaches, with front office executives, with owners. Like there's going to be a lockout that happens, and I think it's an unfortunate thing just because I mean I feel like it comes down to greed. It comes out to money at the end of the day. Like we're watching millionaires and billionaires clash against each other. And all the common baseball fan can do is watch and just, hope for the best, But I think it's definitely trending in the turns for a lockout. I know they sent out the first proposal. I know Evan Drellich at the Athletic did a great job, breaking that stuff down if anybody wants to check it out. But I don't know, man. Like it's kind of interesting to see what that'll go. And it's, a little too weird that it's happened a little bit frequently in back-to-back CBA negotiations, right? Because obviously in 2020, I want to say 22, it started off with a lockout, and now it's coming into that same situation, man. So I mean, it's just gonna come down to what happens at the end of the day. Like I wish I could speak more on it. Luckily we have national reporters who take care of that, but I think the consensus around everywhere is that it's gonna happen.
What is the solution in your opinion? I mean, if you have an opinion, I'm someone that is in favor of a system that has a salary cap and a floor in place. Although I would say that from my perspective as a fan, I would say that the proposal that the owners have put together is a little bit unreasonable, especially on the side of the cap. I think it's a little bit too low that, some teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets, it's not really reasonable to expect them to come down so far. But I think that a system that forces, teams like the A's, the Guardians, the Marlins, the Rays to spend more money, um, it would be good for the sport. I mean, I grew up watching a team that, they traded Adrian Gonzalez, who was the only star that I knew for several years. They moved on from Jake Peavy, all because they couldn't spend money. You watched the A's growing up, and seemingly every single star they had was traded at the deadline. And as a fan, it's hard to follow a team if there's not stars there. And right now, there's no motivation for a small market team to compete and spend the money on a guy like that if there's no return on investment. And I think that's where a lot of fans have sort of like put pause. And by a lot of fans, I mean fans of small market teams. Because, on the grand scheme of things, baseball seems to be in a great spot. But a lot of that is there are so many fans of these big market teams. The Dodgers are, experiencing a boon that we've never seen before. They are capturing an international audience that we truly have not seen in the history of baseball before. I mean, maybe, you think back to the Yankees, in the 90s and even before that, on terms of that level of success in capturing the fan audience. And a lot of that has to do with Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto and, some of the other stars that they have, but that leaves out, the other 29 teams. And I think that, as a fan, you should want fans from all 30 teams to be engaged in the product. If you watch an NFL game at the beginning of the season, how many of those 32 teams logistically think that they have a chance? Now, maybe I know you're a Cardinals fan, no offense, but the Cardinals, the Jets, and maybe a couple other teams may go into the season thinking, we don't have a chance. I'll still watch, but we don't have a chance. But realistically, 80 to 90% of the fans going into the season, whether delusional or not, think, oh yeah, this year, this is the year. This is the year. You don't have that in baseball. I go into the year thinking, yeah, I'm a fan of a good team, but they have zero shot at winning the division. Winning a World Series is the furthest thing from my mind. I'm just hoping they put out a good product on the field. And you don't get that in other sports, and I think part of that is the level of parity that you've seen in baseball is a little bit misleading. If you look at the teams that have won the World Series over the last 10 years, what was the last small market team? The Royals? And yeah, so I guess I sort of asked you a question that went off on a tangent.
No, but
But
I'm 100% for a salary floor. I think that's something that definitely needs to be implemented because, like, I mean, you look at a couple years ago with the A's did all that fire sale trade, which included sending Matt Olson to the Braves, which has worked out for them really, really good. They got Shea Langoliers, the Braves got Matt Olson, but also after that, they also were spending maybe like a little under $40 million on its payroll, and it was really, really, really bad baseball. Like even as a fan of the team growing up, it was hard to watch the team because it was just so bad. And I can only feel bad for people that follow like the White Sox who went on a really bad run. The Rockies have been really bad, and these teams have been kind of bad for a while. Right. And even when they had the opportunity to take care of some of their superstars, like they just weren't able to lock them up because there's no investment in ownership. And I think it would make it a lot more competitive. I'm like, if you want to see like a mock salary floor, look at what the A's are doing, like let's come, at the end of the day, like would they be doing this if they were in Oakland? Probably not, probably they wouldn't be extending guys like Brent Rooker, Lawrence Butler, Tyler Soderstrom and giving big contracts to like Luis Severino. Like I don't imagine that happening in Oakland ever, regardless of it. But they're doing it because if they want to get the money and have people invested in the team and have, investors willing to spend money, put advertisements and stuff like that, you got to come in with a group ready to go. And I think that's kind of that forced them to kind of have a like self-imposed salary floor to be able to do that. Then, I mean, the A's are doing what their A's are doing, coming into a season with a lot of expectations and not executing. And you just can imagine that what you're able to do. Like you still see teams that don't spend a lot, like the Rays, the Guardians, and the Brewers do well because they invest so much into player development and scouting, and do have to do, they have to stand out doing stuff like that. But if you're able to add a salary floor and they're able to spend a little bit more and lock up some guys, that trend in the right direction, like this, it's a lot better for the sport. I think what players, what owners want is at the end of the day is to make a lot of money. And I think what the players want is their money to not decrease or anything like that, which I think are both, on whatever side of the spectrum you see, I think are both reasonable things for both things to come. But also, money is I wouldn't say the root of all evil, but definitely the root of greed. And I think that's just kind of what we're seeing so far from it. So for a salary floor, a salary cap, I mean, to me, it's like I'm back and forth between it. Like, I think if a team wants to spend money and has the money, I think they should do it. Like, who's want to say like that there shouldn't, especially in the structure of this game, to be specific. Like, I look at the Dodgers, and a lot of people like to trash on the Dodgers for spending a lot of money. The Dodgers also do a really good job when it comes to player development, when it comes to scouting, when it comes to the coaches that they have. Like, it is top notch. Like, every time I was on the Dodgers side of Camelback Ranch, they treated those players like really really well, like they from top to bottom. They have good scouts. And a lot of, you look at their farm system right now, like I'm a fan of their farm system. They do a good job of finding guys, signing guys like Josue DePaula, trading for Zaire Hope and Mike Sirota. They make good trades when they get prospects. They end up being pretty good. I mean, Eduardo Quintana, arguably the best prospect in their system. And yeah, like what's the reality? Any of those guys see the field for the Dodgers this year? Very little to none, because at the end of the day, like the Dodgers have the leverage to trade those players for, per se, a Tarek Skubal or other players that they want to make deals with, and in turns they get the players that they want, make the other team better. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I just hope that there is hope that there isn't a lockout, obviously, because that means that I wouldn't be covering baseball every day. But we'll see what happens, man.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a world where baseball could put in a salary floor without a cap that makes sense for the owners? I think for a lot of the smaller market owners, one of the reasons why they want the cap is if they're going to be spending more money, they're going to need players to spend it on, and you don't want to just spend it on random players. You want to have good guys to go and get. And it's going to be hard to do that if, if all the good players are still being, bought by these higher teams. Well, if these higher teams aren't able to afford them, now there's more good players to go around. You get that in the NBA where seemingly every single team has, those high market stars. Every single team has like one or two guys making, top level money. You don't get that in baseball. You get teams, the Marlins, for what it's worth, they got a couple guys, a little over 10 million. I think Pete Fairbanks and Christopher Morel, not great players by any means, but the Marlins needing to spend money to sort of hit that mythical floor. Spend money on a couple veterans, but they're nowhere near like the Dodgers or the Mets, who, half their rosters making,
Oh, yeah,
seven,
yeah.
eight figures. Um, or I guess 8 or 9 figures annually. So
I mean, look at what the
sorry,
Braves are
eight
doing.
figures.
Braves have a relatively big payroll, but they also locked in a lot of these guys really early, and I think that's kind of a trend that you're seeing happening. There's a lot of these pre-arb deals that we aren't accustomed to seeing at baseball. I mean, I would say before kind of the Braves started doing it with handing out extensions to guys like Austin Riley, Ozzy Albies, Acuna, who I feel like that Acuna contract right now is like a really good bang for their buck. Olsen, when they first traded for him, like right away, they signed him to a pre-arbor extension. Same thing with Sean Murphy. I think there's ways to do it, but I think it's like that conundrum that you just brought up too. Like it's I don't know, man. Like we'll see. All we can do is wait and see to see what happens.
All we can do is wait and see. Going back to Fresno State, Bulldogs are going to the Pac-12. Lots of excitement with that. Who are your 4 favorite Bulldogs of all time? It could be in any sport. Doesn't necessarily need to be the best Bulldog. Doesn't necessarily need to be a Bulldog you covered, but just maybe a Bulldog you like as a fan. Just, and if not 4, just a few guys that you really enjoyed watching growing up.
So I think to make it fair, I'm not gonna mention the 4 players who could easily cover this list. Aaron Judge, Paul
Judge,
George.
Adams, Carr.
Yeah, we're not gonna mention those guys. I will say, I think 2 guys that come to mind from my time when I was there was Jake Henninger and Ronnie Rivers, just because I was able to see them make it up from high school sports. And like I really saw like Ronnie Rivers like was getting like no love, no offers. Like I think he was, heading into his senior year, the real offer that he only had was Sacramento State. at the time, from what I was told from a couple different sources, was that he didn't get offered until Tedford came back because the previous head coach kind of didn't believe in him, and then Tedford gives him the chance, and Ronnie goes on to break records at Fresno State. So I would say him, Hayner's one of them. Like I'm trying to find where that they had a Visalia rawhide bobblehead of him, and I'm trying to. It's somewhere in my apartment. It's somewhere in storage. I just can't find it, or else it'd be placed right there. But Jake Hayner's another guy too. I mean, he was. I mean, talk about like resilience. What he was able to do that year, where the Bulldogs went on that insane run, beating UCLA. Took it to Oregon. Just the way that he was able to crawl out and stuff like that. Like Hayner's up there. I think other guys I'm trying to think of too, like Orlando Robinson. I think it was really nice to see like for a Fresno State basketball program that has struggled and is probably always going to struggle for a very long time, unfortunately, just because there's not the investment that you see with football gone into basketball. Like there's no stability. It's like a rotating carousel of players hitting the portal. It's unfortunate. Like I just don't know how you fix that. Like hopefully, Garrett Classy is able to find a way to fix that. Hopefully Vance Wahlberg is able to do it because we need some good Fresno State basketball. And I feel like I'm at the point where I can start making those demands because we need that, right? But seeing a guy talented like Orlando, like just every single night, just being able to see him perform, when I was my first year at Fresno State, like when I was a sports editor, I covered a lot of basketball, which isn't my forte or anything like that. And being able to see a NBA caliber prospect for a program that wasn't very good, I think was impressive. And then I'm three, right? Ooh, who's one more that I'm trying to think of? Trying to think of other sports. See, football,
What about baseball?
baseball. See, I don't want to say Judge. I don't want to say. You know who was good watching? Eson Henderson. And I think the way we've seen him turn out, I think has also been really good. But I would also put Murph Gray in that category. Just because I think I was right at the end. I think I just graduated when he was a freshman. So hearing him where he's at now and really the way he was able to elevate his prospect status is really good. Like heading into the draft, like a lot of evaluators didn't think he could stick at third base. A lot of people saw him heading towards the outfield at first base, and I feel like he's done a good job of like proving that wrong. Has a really good bat, and also just overall a good guy that comes from a really good family. Like I remember writing a story at Baseball America like about Murph Gray, and it was kind of hard to pitch that story because it was like, oh yeah, he goes to Fresno State. You know why I'm writing it, but like I really needed to sell that story, and I think it did a good job just with what he was able to say. So I think he's a really good guy, man. All those players I think that we've mentioned are really good people.
Yeah, so I announced a couple of baseball games at Fresno State in let's say 2022, and remember one of those games Eshan was starting. Now last year he was the Cardinals minor league pitcher of the year. Obviously he got injured a little bit during the off season, or I think it was maybe during spring training. Um but yeah, he's on his way. Hopefully the Cardinals would be able to use him. Cardinals might be a playoff team this year. He might get traded. We'll see.
Fresno State
But
baseball
yeah,
does such a good job of pumping out guys into the league, man. Like you look at this past draft class too, Murph Gray, was it Cremarosa? And I forget the other.
Cremarosa and Anchor, and then
Yeah,
Justin Stransky is with the Cubs. I mean, if you look a lot at why the baseball team this year struggled, it's because you're missing four guys that were a part of back-to-back championship conference championship teams. Four guys that played a very pivotal role. You had an everyday starting catcher, you had arguably the two best pitchers in the conference, and you had the best hitter in the conference. And then you missed that. And all four of those guys have had success. Stransky hasn't been lighting it up, but he's playing in high A baseball. In his first year of professional ball.
yeah.
There's something to be said about that. And Cremarosa, throws a no hitter. He's got an ERA under 3 right now. Jack Anchor's been excellent since he's moved into the rotation
Yeah, Anchor
for the Pirates.
from a lot of evaluators too that were really high on him. Like I remember being there for that Mountain West tournament at Sloan Park in Mesa, Arizona. Like there was a lot of people there to, of course, watch Murph, but also to watch Anchor.
Yeah, and so the one thing that I've always loved about Jack is he puts the ball in the strike zone. He doesn't walk guys. And that's one thing that he talked to me about when he was on the podcast is he hates walking guys. He hates it. And you have to sort of have that mentality if you want to be a strike thrower. Is you have, I mean, the same way that, athletes will talk about, you got to hate losing more than loving winning. Jack hates walking guys more than he loves, throwing strikes. But yeah, and obviously, Murph's incredible. We saw it, firsthand at Fresno State. I got to cover him all 3 years of his time at Fresno State, and it, I think the on-field results speak for themselves. But if you watch him off the field, and I think that's where he really stands out, is not everyone has the type of character that Murph exudes, and it's one of, I'm no bigger than the next person. I'm, just simply another guy. And he carries that with him throughout the locker room, throughout the field, and fans notice that.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. And I think the other thing too for him is for one, I think you look at the Pirates system and they do such a good job scouting. Like this is beyond just like, schemes and like them getting Seth Hernandez, who was the best player in the draft. Like it's just tough, like the way I like to compare it to people, and taking Seth Hernandez, he is gonna have the best career out of everybody in that draft. Like I'm very confident about that. But drafting a high school right-hander #1 overall is like picking a running back in the top 5 picks, which the Cardinals happen to do. The Arizona Cardinals happen to do, right? So yeah, man, like I think he's been able to really work past like a lot of stuff. I think the biggest thing was the chase rate. He was chasing a lot when he was out in college. I think that was one of the biggest concern was, and when you look at chase rate to at least the numbers we were able to get, that's whether you make contact or not. I didn't know the exact numbers about whether he was whiffing when he was chasing, but that was the biggest thing. And also the mobility within third base was what scared a lot of evaluators down, because if he's not going to be able to be the strong defensive player, a lot of people, he was looking at Fresno State, it wouldn't be the case. And I remember talking to Coach Oberlin, Ryan Oberlin, after the game, and I asked him straight up. I was like, dude, do you think that that Murph Gray plays good at first base or the outfield? And he straight up says, no, that's a third baseman, and that's kind of been the case for him. So continues to defy odds for them, man. I'm really excited for him, to see what happens. I believe he's on my side of Florida for spring training, so it'll be good to run into him at some point down the road there too.
Most definitely. Last question before you go. Favorite restaurant in Fresno? What food you missing?
So I think the cheap answer would be Doghouse, which I love Doghouse. And as you know, I have that series where I ask former Fresno State athletes what their favorite order is. Hopefully do that to Aaron Judge at some point. But there was this place called Bulldog Burger Bistro, which was in that plaza right adjacent to the stadium where it had the Bulldog shop. I forget what it's called now. Bulldog Locker, I believe is what it's called now. I remember going to that place for the first time, and it was the best burger I've ever had. Like I feel like I gained a lot of weight just eating there so much because I mean they had a really good like pastrami burger, and it was one of the best that I've ever had. And it wasn't just that; it was the wings, it was a different type of fries, and they had sushi at some point, but then they shut down during the pandemic. Um, because I mean there was just not a lot of people coming into the storefront, and now it turned into a food truck, and now I believe they're selling it out of a Valero gas station in Clovis, and that's one of the places I'm definitely gonna miss. But there's also this really good Chinese spot that I need to shout them out because those were my guys back then. Like it was right where I lived at. I lived at Avery in Fresno, which was known as Jefferson Commons for a lot of the older, I guess, what's it called? A lot of the older Fresno State alums. What's his name? Happened to live there. Austin Wins lived at Jefferson Commons, is what he told me. But there was a really good Chinese restaurant. Like I have to look up the name of it because I forget it. It's called Winhua Chinese Restaurant off of Bullard and First Street. That place was amazing, and I would literally get like a to-go container packed to the brim. Like the thing wouldn't close for $8. It was insane. It was one of the best deals I've ever had. Like I would go there so much, and like it was good food, good people. Like it was like the traditional like Chinese restaurant that you see like stereotyped and stuff like that, man. Like they had their kid working there. Like I saw that kid go from like 3 years old to like 7, 8 years old. And I was like, wow, this is crazy, man. So that's one restaurant I definitely miss. And I wish I could find some good tacos in Fresno. Like it was really tough to find good tacos. Like I know it's like the taco capital of the world, but I think the best tacos I found there was at El Premio Mayor. which is I forget the cross streets, but it's I want to say maybe Clinton, Ashland. I forget where it's at, but I know they have two locations. But I will say I do miss the nightlife in Fresno a little bit. It does feel nice, specifically with the Tower District. Like Livingston's is great. Shout out, what's that place? Goldstein's. Goldstein was a good place too. And then I went there about a year ago, and I think we went to I forget the other place it's called, but it's a relatively good nightlife that I miss, man. I miss Fresno. Like I still have friends that live there and stuff like that. Like it played a huge role in my development as a person. Like I'm always going to be thankful for like the time I spent there because it really gave me the time to ingrain myself in a new community and really understand, a different side of California that was essential to the rest of the world. Like a lot of people don't realize about Fresno County or the surrounding counties, whether it's Tulare, Madera, Kings County, like they feed, maybe 60% of the world. I mean, 60% of the world, 60% of the country with the agriculture, right? Like that, there's so much that goes into it, that they go. And a lot of people like the, quite frankly, like shit on Fresno for it being boring and stuff like that. Like to me, like it was a great place. You get a lot of people who are working hard, want to make it out, and specifically when it comes to Fresno State, I think what I liked about it the most is that it is like an economical engine to the community because you have people that can stay relatively close, like it was because it's a commuter school. Like 60% of the people, and I did a research on this, like lived in the surrounding and the feeder counties. And a lot of those people tend to stay there and give back to their community, and I think being part of that and also seeing what the athletics program meant to a lot of them, because that's really the big show that they have in town, like that's to me that was really special, man. And I think back to my time at Fresno State a lot very fondly. I'm thankful for all the people that I met there, all the people that doubted me there, all of that stuff that went into it, man. Some of the best lessons I learned were from at Fresno State. So that's why this is the background, man. This, I get to do a lot of more national TV hits and stuff like that. It's for people to know that, we, even though I'm in the A, I'm still finna rep the F. You feel me? So I love it, man.
Well, go dogs for sure. And thank you for joining us today, Jesus, and best of luck covering the Braves the rest of the year.
Appreciate it. And I will be, I actually get to watch Fresno State football play in 2 years because they will be playing Georgia Southern here in Statesboro, Georgia. So I look forward to that. It's in late September though, so I hope that either the Braves have clinched or, maybe they're not going to that trajectory at that time, so I can go to that game because I'm already looking forward to it. Me and Chad Bishop, who covers the Braves for the Atlanta Journal Constitution. He is a Georgia Southern grad and big fan, so that will be our right. We already have that date circled in 2 years.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, and thank you to everyone tuning in, and have a great rest of your week.